a delicious meal. I looked up what they're having. Carved prime rib and apple smoked salmon with an apricot chutney glaze, along with a bunch of really good sides, and chocolate strawberry cheesecake or cherry pie for dessert. So it sounds really good.
Yeah, definitely.
So you want to make your plans to come to that for a nice date night? Or
That's in February, yeah.
Yep.
February 8th.
And I understand there's some audio issues going on, so apparently no one can hear us right now. So we're just talking heads. Yeah.
Our live
So-
audience can hear us at least.
I'm sure they're working on it and they'll get it up. And so if you missed the first part, don't worry. We're always archived on the Answers in Genesis YouTube channel, and we're on the Facebook pages.
Oh, no, I was going to say their
So-
sound, but no, they were asking me to
Hopefully
send this.
we'll
Never
be
mind.
on soon. So we'll just go on talking like we're being heard. At least you all.
We can be like the old-fashioned days, you know, where you act it out and then it moves over and it tells you what we said.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that's the old-fashioned moving picture show.
Oh, right. So let's get started with our first story here.
This comes from Fox News. University staff told not to use "don't" or frightening capital letters. So this comes from Leeds Trinity University in the UK, where journalism professors were instructed not to use certain words in case they frighten sensitive students.
Oh, so I'm a former college professor, and I actually teach college online as well right now, and I can't imagine not being able to use do or don't. I mean, how else are the students going to know what to do and what not to do? I mean, it's kind of important when you're teaching to be able to do that, so it's just amazing to me.
Right, the use of capital letters has been banned as well. And that's, you know,
All caps.
all caps, you know, as if you're
give
yelling,
emphasis.
which is
Right,
what you see
yes.
sometimes. So,
And they're saying that the lack of clarity can generate anxiety and discourage students from even attempting the assessment at all. So they need to try and reduce
so
anxiety.
how do you do that? How do you say, don't use the word don't?
Well, they want you to spell out everything in a lot of detail so that students feel comfortable doing it. And I understand that to some degree. I mean, it's good to have good instruction so people know what to do and not do, that is. But at the same time, you know, when you go out there into the real world, so to speak, beyond college, a lot of times you're given something to do, but you're not told exactly how to do it. It's your job to figure out how to do
Oh,
it.
yeah, you know, as an engineer, I mean, that kind of stuff happened all the time. It's like somebody, you know, boss would come down, figure this out, go. We need it as fast as possible. And, you know, a lot of times you're working in factories that are crazy loud and all sorts of different things like that too, trying to get things done. And, you know, you have pressure and you got to get it done. You got to get it done right.
And you've got to be able to handle pressure.
Quickly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean,
so-
it's just so... It's just another example with our snowflake, what they call the snowflake generation, and we're doing them a great disservice. We're not helping them, we're harming them.
Right. Instead of teaching people to work through that kind of stuff, they're just pandering to it.
Yeah, they claim they want
They
to give every student the support to realize their potential. That's what the university claims. But at the same time, you need to let people learn to figure things out or learn to fail, because that's part of life.
Yeah.
As harsh as that sounds, it is part of life.
Part of life.
All right, it looks like some people have their audio back. So
That's good.
thank you to everybody up in the tech box who was working on that. We appreciate it. All right, this next
All
one.
these people are using capital letters on, you know, on following the comments now. They're just having some fun with
yeah,
it.
Craig Fair has used all capitals to say, don't use no double negatives either. So
Okay.
Yeah, you got to use triple negatives. Then it's back where you want it to be.
So this one comes from Canada, New Brunswick, I believe. Documentary aims to normalize the way transgender people are viewed. So this is about a documentary that premiered last week in Moncton, New Brunswick. And it was basically this film director who took her youngest child to kindergarten, and when she went to fill in the form to register her child, they asked her if her child was male, female, or non-binary, and she was like, non-binary, what does that mean? So she started this sort of investigation into the lives of transgender people because she believes as her parent it was her responsibility to look into that, and out of that came this documentary.
That's interesting. They only had 3.
Yeah.
Male, female,
Well,
and non-gender or
Non-binary, I
but-
guess, covers the whole plethora of other things.
Because
that you
sometimes
can
people
be.
they want to consider themselves both or
Right, or they don't want to be
Yeah.
defined by boundaries, which is typically what
it's-
non-binary means. They're sort of, they don't want to be defined or put in either box, so to
So
speak.
it's really weird in today's culture.
But it's all
some of
about
this kind of stuff.
normalizing. You know, that wording is used several times in this article.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
this documentary aims to normalize, and that's how it always starts. You know, it's put in TV shows or put in, and I'm amazed. Like I've watched some old reruns of shows, even from the mid '90s. Okay, and back then, I was graduating from college in the mid '90s, starting graduate school, and so I can remember that things like homosexuality, that was not well accepted by society in any way, shape, or form. And yet, when I watch some of these old TV shows, I'm amazed at how much it's there. Like it was starting to be introduced, that whole idea, and now
More
look at where
subtly
we're at.
than
Right,
today,
it was there. It's just wasn't quite accepted yet, and now it is. So that's the way they do it, and that's why we have to be very cautious and careful of these kinds of things.
This is a very short article, and yet if you add it up, he, she, his, her was used over 16 times here. It looks like that I could find in the article.
Because it's impossible to talk about it without using those. They can say that all they want.
And the film director said, you don't really choose the color of your eyes or the color of your hair. It's just like being transgender. You don't choose that. Which really isn't a great comparison. I mean,
There have been people coming
hair
out of it,
color,
so-
eye color, that's all genetic. And guess what? So is gender.
Yeah.
I mean, and what they're trying to say is they're trying to say gender is different from biological sex. So your biological sex is what you're born with, but gender is something you choose.
So
and
why is
they've
it then that people want to
separated
have
them.
the sex change, as bad as it is, have to talk about this, to match with their gender when they don't view those things actually correlating with each other?
Well, now they
actually
call it
inconsistent,
different things too, like gender transitioning surgery. They've
Right, or
actually
gender
even
affirmation
changed
surgery.
the terminology on that to match what they're trying to do. We got lots of people on here. I see somebody from Northern Ireland, and then let's see where else. Moscow, Idaho. Okay, not Moscow, Russia.
California.
It's funny.
Florida,
Someone says
Romania.
on here that they feel like 50% of the articles are from Canada lately. And it's funny, we
everyone's
were just
picking on
talking about that
Canada.
ahead
Shows
of time.
them.
You said that.
Everyone's picking on Canada. And the next one's from Canada, too.
It is. Look at that. Yeah.
This one comes from LifeSite News. Gay activists are coming after Christian churches next, and it's already happening. So this is talking about in Canada, and for those who are Canadian and who follow the news, you'll probably be very familiar. There's been a lot of sort of attacks on religious freedom and religious liberty in Canada because of LGBTQ issues. And they list a couple of those here. Trinity Western University, which was not allowed to open a law school because they have students used to have, they gave it up now, but used to have them sign a covenant
That they would actually believe what the Bible says on the subject.
Yeah, exactly. And so the Supreme Court of Canada would not allow them to open a law school because they discriminate against LGBT students in the eyes of the Supreme Court anyway. And they give a couple of other issues, but the one they're talking about here specifically is about a woman named Kimberly Mills who was attending Calvary Baptist Church in Oshawa, Ontario. And she eventually started serving as a youth leader there. And then the church found out that she was living with her female partner, and so they basically implemented church discipline, took away her membership, asked her to step down from her leadership role, and she was not too thrilled about that.
Yeah, and she was taken off the membership role as well of the church because they said, well, she's not choosing to live within the guidelines that our church has for membership, which makes sense. I mean, organizations have guidelines, so if you don't follow those guidelines and don't live by them, then you shouldn't be a member of that, or whether it's a church or organization or whatever it is. But what got me is that, and it gets me with a lot of these things where we see, gay people suing like bakeries and not letter, but when they do their invitations and things, they have choices. They have other places they can go to get this done that will be glad to service them and glad to help them and do that. But yet they want to, go after, the Christians many times. Because even when she made this public, what had happened to her, a lot of churches, pastors wrote to her and said, oh, you need to come to our church. We totally support you in your relationship. So it's not like this is the only church she could go to.
Yeah, there's plenty of other things she could have done. But it sounds to me like, in some cases, people are targeting Christians and they're targeting the churches as well.
Right.
I want you to understand, Satan hates the church. Satan hates God. Satan hates the church. And he wants to destroy churches. And so there's a lot of ways people try to do that. One way, the most obvious way, is to infiltrate and destroy from within. And, it wouldn't surprise me if we see more examples of this type of stuff in the future.
It's interesting, she said that she started to be concerned about coming out at the church when a sermon took a strong stand against homosexuality. She felt like she wasn't able to be her true self well at church. And I love the parenthetical note the author of this article put in there. They said, this is understandable, as biblical churches do not exist to help people feel true to themselves. It's so true. We're supposed to call people to repentance and to obeying God's word. Yes, which often goes against how you feel and how you want to live your life.
Yeah.
And so what this did was initiate what they call a community advocate that said, well, this was wrong, what happened to her. So churches should no longer have charitable status anymore. They should have to pay taxes. And we've seen this coming for a long time
Oh, yeah,
now. I mean, this
one of those
is
is
just
only a
the
matter of
next
time
step.
kind of thing.
It's going to happen here in the U.S., probably
Yep.
just like it is Canada, that any kind of Christian organization or Christian ministry or church is going to have their nonprofit status revoked if they won't affirm LGBT ideas, basically.
Yeah, that activist said, the church has allowed its resources to be used for activities that promote hate and intolerance. If you're going to promote hate and intolerance, you shouldn't receive benefits from the Canadian government.
Why do they think hate and intolerance is bad in their worldview?
Yeah.
It's a
I
good
mean,
question.
hate's a bad thing from a Christian viewpoint,
Right.
you
It
know,
is.
Yeah.
hate wrongly and that sort of thing. You know, so it's interesting. They're actually borrowing that from the Bible, but then they want to turn it around. You see the twisting that's going on. I've always wondered what would happen, you know, if they did say, hey, let's take the churches, you know, like here in the United States, for example, if they took churches and said, we're going to get rid of your tax exempt status, you know, because you don't support LGBT, you don't support sexual humanism, for example, that religion, you know what would happen? All these churches would now be free to endorse candidates, for
Yeah.
example. They can
Yeah.
endorse parties and stuff, you know, because those are the types of things that churches are not allowed to do under the tax exempt status. So imagine what would happen, you know, if all of a sudden all these different churches were taking stands in politics now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it would definitely change the dynamics in this country.
Well, and this church made it clear to her that they still wanted her to attend services. They still wanted her to come because obviously, and that's the thing. And they say, well, if you disagree with us, you hate us. No, we don't hate you.
Well, they disagree with us. Does that mean they hate us? You see, I
Right.
mean, it's arbitrary. You can turn that around. Yeah.
But we
Yeah,
want to speak
yeah.
the truth in love. I'm sure the church still wants the opportunity to minister to her and to help her to realize that she's living in sin and to be repentant of that sin. And so that's a good thing, and that's what the church should have done. But again, this is just another what we should expect more and more of, and
Oh,
why
yeah,
we,
for sure.
you know, need to be, especially churches, need to be well educated on these issues and know how to help people that are in these situations
And know
deal
what
with
they
possible
believe about the issue and why they believe that. And churches need to be talking about this to the people in their pews because it's the issue of our day right now.
Yeah.
All right, this next one. Ask a scientist, what would life look like if evolution wasn't occurring? That's a bit of a tongue twister there in the middle. This article was, so he starts out talking about this really pretty bird, which you have a picture of,
It's the
motmot.
Motmot,
Which,
yeah.
I mean, it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous bird. And he says, you look at that and you think, wow, this bird is a work of art. Surely a creature like this was designed, created, made. How else could it be so lovely? He talks about how it's awe-inspiring, and so are so many of the other creatures, which is basically like Romans 1, right? Like, you look
I
at
do know
creation
that, yeah.
and you see
Right.
there is a creator. There's enough evidence to convince anyone there's a creator from what he's made. But then he goes on to say,
then they
or
go
she
on
rather,
to
sorry.
suppress that, right? They go on to suppress it. Let's see. How do they do it?
So she goes on to talk about how all of this beauty, all of this variety comes because of evolution and because of variation and time, basically.
Hey, at the same time, Dr. Purdom, you're a scientist. If I were to ask a scientist, would you agree with their assessment that this thing just came about by mutation, natural selection, and a whole bunch of time?
There's no way. I mean,
no
there's
way.
absolutely no way. And because we know from studying mutations and natural selection and things like that, we know what they do because we can observe this in the present. We know that mutations take away, they harm typically, or they don't have much of an effect at all. We know that natural selection just selects from the variety that's already in a population of organisms. It doesn't add to. See, to go from molecules to man, you've got to add new traits. You've got to add new things, right? And so, but mutations and natural selection and other mechanisms that they talk about here don't do what they need them to do.
Yeah.
And so they say, well, you know, if you just give it enough time, and time is always the key.
It's
to
the
them.
God of an evolutionary worldview. You have to have millions of years.
Interestingly,
you just
though,
have to have it.
the origin of life is being pushed back further and further and further. They're running out of time.
That's
so
right,
even
running out of
time,
time,
That's
in
why
their
they
own
push the origin
worldview,
of life to
time,
outer space
yeah, is on their
because there's
side.
not enough time here on Earth.
Okay, one of the things it says in the article, Charles Darwin and his lesser-known co-author, Alfred Russel Wallace, which I've been to his museum, by the way, over in Leicester, England, it says, we know that there is variation in every population. Well, hold on a
I
second
agree.
here. There were
Yes.
people long before that. Moses talks about variation in
I
critters. You
agree.
go back to Jacob, you can see it in the book of James. All throughout the Bible, it talks about things like that. Ed Blythe, who was a Christian 25 years before Darwin's, even describing some of these variations, which we would today call natural selection. Darwin gave it the name. But, I mean,
Yeah.
they give these guys credit for certain things when, hold it, this was around long before that.
And when the author wrote that part, I was just like, okay, back up. Where did the variety come from? Like, yes, there's
Where did it
lots
come
of
from?
variety. Where did it come from? And
It's
she never
like,
tries to
Where-
answer that
Where
question.
did the circulatory system come from the mop mat? Or where did the nervous system come
You
from?
have to have the information, and there is no natural
That's
mechanism
right.
that adds brand new
You don't just,
genetic
oh wow, we
information.
got a mutation. There's a whole circulatory system. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
we don't
Well,
see that.
and the
We don't
thing
observe
is
it.
that I always say to evolution or evolutionists, I'll give you all the time you want. So you can have trillions of years, but if you don't have a genetic mechanism to add novel traits and new things, you will never get anywhere. So time is not the key. It's a mechanism to do what evolution needs, and there's
there
no known
isn't.
mechanism
Yeah.
to do that. So that's where it all falls short. And then they go into she talks about how, well, if organisms were designed, she says, they would have died off millennia ago simply because of changing environments.
What?
Well, so God can't design things to adapt and deal with the situations that he knows are coming up?
You know, that's
Right,
a
yeah.
straw man fallacy
Yeah, it
on
is.
God.
That isn't what-
an all-knowing
yeah.
God, if he's going to design something, he's going to design it to be able to last and to be able to adapt and that sort of thing.
Which is
So,
what
I mean, it's just
he
a straw
did. I
man
mean, we
fallacy.
see animals adapting and to different environments, and because
Well,
he's a wise creator.
here's something else that I caught in here. You know, right as it follows that up, it says, nor is there any fossil evidence for such a change, you know, that we're seeing in there.
Right.
Now, I look at that and I'm like, hold on a second here. When it comes to the fossil record, the majority of what we see in the fossil record is a snapshot of the flood of Noah's day. That's a course of 1 year. Now, if the secular world wants to reinterpret that, but here's the problem. They want to reinterpret that. They want to assume naturalism on those rock layers to now argue for naturalism. That's actually begging the question. They're assuming naturalism to try to argue for naturalism. That's fallacious.
Yeah.
Right. And she talks about how there's no fossil evidence for a sudden eruption of fully formed organisms comparable to us. And you wanted to talk about that book, Bodhi.
Yeah, we do. We have a book
because
here.
that really addresses her
Yeah,
claim
this
there.
is actually volume 2. The first book is from Dr. Carl Werner called Evolution, the Grand Experiment. And this is the follow-up, Living Fossils, Evolution, the Grand Experiment, volume 2. And it is a fascinating book, just taking a look. What he did, he actually went around and he actually contacted all these different scientists all over the world, went to museums and different professors and so forth. And he asked them, well, what do we have? What's been found? And let's get to the bottom of this. And it's a powerful book.
Yeah, it shows a lot of
Yeah.
modern day creatures.
Well, we
in
can
the fossil
identify
record.
what's in the fossil record because we have animals that look like that today.
Yeah, we even have
It's
some of those
not
fossils
hard.
here. Like
Yeah.
up in the hall,
Yeah.
we have a crab that looks just like
Yeah.
Yeah.
crabs.
They're not dramatically different like the author seems to think. So what we see, the evidence, whether it's genetic, fossil, whatever it might be, supports biblical creation. It doesn't support the evolutionary claims at all.
This next one comes from the Washington Post. Chinese scientists' claim of gene-edited babies creates uproar. So this came last Monday, I believe, out of China, where a researcher claimed he'd edited the DNA of human embryos, which had then been implanted, went through pregnancy, and were born twin baby girls. And the
Yes.
scientific community is pretty concerned about this.
You know all that stuff they kept saying nobody would do? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and to say that's an understatement. It has been huge uproar about this. I was watching him actually at the meeting that he presented at last week. He was getting heckled, actually, and they had to remove people. It sounded like they were removing people because he couldn't even speak. He was having trouble because this is a very serious, if he's actually done this, which he's went about this the wrong way. You're supposed to publish it in a scientific journal first, and then you announce it to the media. He has not published this information yet, so we have no way to verify if his claims are true. So that's something to just remember at the outset of this. But if it is, what he's done is he has changed the genetic information of individuals before they were born, such that now they will pass whatever changes were made onto their children. Okay, so that's what makes this significant.
Yeah,
I mean, very
pretty
significant.
serious.
More than 120 Chinese scientists, the article says here, called the experiment crazy in a letter and added that this is a huge blow to the global reputation of Chinese science.
It is. Because this is not how, there's a moratorium on this basically all over the world that you're not supposed to do this because the system that they're doing the gene editing with, they call it gene surgery is what the Chinese are calling it, but it's called the CRISPR-Cas9 system. And basically the idea is that this system will go in and it's been used, I mean, we've talked about it a lot on Answers News and it has some very good uses. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But what they did was they went in and they used this system to modify a gene so that these individuals females, these children, Lulu and Nana, will not be able to contract the HIV virus. So they've modified the receptor that accepts HIV into cells, so they won't have that.
And that may seem on the surface as, oh, a good thing,
Right.
but that can also make you more susceptible to other things.
Other West Nile virus, flu virus, when they have mutations in what's called CCR5, can come from that. And the other thing too is we don't know if other changes in the genome and the DNA have been made. This system is not perfect, which is why they said don't use it in humans yet, because we don't know if it's making other genetic changes. Now, and if you read, and again, I don't have a scientific paper yet to look at, but they say they looked at other genes, all the other genes for these children, and they're fine. Okay, but what if that's only 2% of our DNA? What about all the stuff in between the genes? Is it fine? Is it okay? Did it not make other changes? I don't know, and that's what's truly frightening about this.
Yeah, yeah.
It says in here, basically for the first time in history, he has used this powerful tool in a reckless way for no good reason.
Yeah, because HIV can be dealt with. I realize it's not curable, but at least it can be dealt with to some degree. So there's lots of questions about that. I've listened to the videos by this scientist, the original videos that he posted on YouTube. I think he has really good intentions. Okay, don't get me wrong. I think he has really good intentions, but he has gone way beyond what is acceptable and what should be done right now.
And not only does this open a door, but it brings up something. I mean, the one reason he probably wasn't publishing this kind of thing was because he's probably going to get in all sorts of trouble if he did.
Yep. Yep.
And so it makes you wonder how many other people are out there doing things like this behind the scenes because they're too afraid to say anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And now that they're seeing the outcome, I mean, it's a big problem.
And he makes it clear that so the big fear with this is always that they're going to design babies that not just against disease, but design them with certain eye colors and hair colors and height and athletic ability. And he makes it very clear in his videos, well, that should be banned. You know, that shouldn't be allowed at all.
But why?
But why?
Why
Right,
in the secular world?
I know it's wrong.
I mean, I can understand. All these people want to gene edit. I want to look like Bodie Hodge, you know. Well, okay, maybe they won't go that far. But
Let's hope not.
let's hope not. But I mean, imagine that. Imagine people wanting to do that sort of thing. I mean, there have been movies about this type of thing, and so I think it's in the mindset.
But they don't start out with a biblical worldview and a biblical foundation that every human being is made in the image of God. Then we have to worry about those things. Yes, they can have good uses, but they can also have really bad uses. And so it's how do we determine that and deal with that. So,
and one of the things looking at the whole issue of gene editing from a biblical perspective is, like, people are really upset because he edited these genes and then the babies grew and were born.
Right.
Whereas if he just discarded the embryos after he was done, people wouldn't be upset.
Right.
And that is where the biblical worldview clashes with that, because those embryos are made in the image of God. They're children, and they're just thrown away after they're finished editing with them, and that's just horribly tragic. And unfortunately,
they're experimenting with humans.
Yeah, and then just throwing them away.
So I'm
when they're
interested to see the actual paper. When the actual paper comes out, we're going to take a look at that and see what they really did or didn't do.
This next one is also pretty sad and disturbing. Mom dresses 6-year-old son as girl, threatens dad with losing his son for disagreeing. And the subline is, a Texas custody case splits a 6-year-old child's gender identity in two. So this is out of Texas. There's a little boy named James. He's 6 years old. When he's with his mother, he lives the life of a trans girl named Luna. He wears girl clothes. He goes by Luna. Her, she, goes to school as a girl. But when he goes to live with his dad, he wants to be called James. He wants to be called he, him, wear boy clothes, do boy things. And so the father does not agree with the transgender diagnosis for his son. And the mother has basically charged him with child abuse in court proceedings, has threatened to have restraining orders against him, tried to terminate his parental rights, tried to require him to pay for James's visits to a therapist, and which could include hormonal sterilization starting at the age of 8.
Yeah, and that's what's really sad. I mean, the mother is accusing the father of child abuse, but actually what she's doing is child abuse, and even having to the point of chemically or hormonally altering this little boy because he's a girl around her, but a boy around his dad. And I think, when I look at this for a 6-year-old, I think this is a 6-year-old trying to appease his parents and what they want.
It was interesting too when the boy would be with other kids and stay with other people. He was always acting like a boy.
Yeah.
The only person that he would act like a girl around is with his mom, especially when she was looking over his shoulder.
His dad's required by the courts to, when his son gets dressed in the morning, to give him boy clothes or girl clothes, and his son can pick which one he wants. And he always picks the boy clothes
clothes.
when he's
always.
with his dad. Whereas the mom doesn't have to give him an option. She just provides girl clothes for him.
Right.
So this poor father has been put through so much, and he might, depending on how the courts decide, might even lose his son over this issue. And it's
Well,
just
yeah, and it could be
horrible.
worse than that. They might actually want to try to do some sterilization and all sorts of other
Yeah.
things
It's
that they would
horrible.
do with the child to try to force him to go into,
Yeah.
well, to
He's-
actually physically
the
change.
father isn't even allowed to talk about his religious or even science-based
Reasons for
reasons
that
that
being
he thinks.
wrong.
Yeah, like
Right.
he's not allowed to do that at all, according to the courts, which is.
And one thing that worries me
mind-boggling.
about this, this child has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, a mental conflict. Okay, so something that's mentally not right? So instead of saying, well, okay, let's try to get this right, let's try to do this.
Which is what they do with most mental
to see that this
issues.
is a problem
Right.
in your thinking. They just instead say, let us help you continue on with that problematic thinking and affirm your problematic thinking. What other mental disorder or mental problem do we do this with? I mean, we shouldn't and we don't
No, we
usually,
usually
but
try and help
yet
people with mental
here,
health
it's all about
issues.
being politically correct and
Right,
all
and they're
of
saying
those
that as a result, there could be a series of physical and mental consequences for the child
Yeah, I mean, if
for the rest of their life.
yeah, like, this is a lifelong thing that could happen to this poor child. It's
Yeah, so we
It's
need
crazy.
to remember, just biblically, what does it say? That God created man and woman, right? He did not create, that was it. There's two sexes, there's two genders. That's
And
all that there is.
we live in a broken world, so there are going to be people who genuinely struggle with the issue
Right.
of gender. But the answer is not to affirm them to go down a sinful path. It's to say, no, God created us male and female, and
Right.
and His design is good. And even in a sin, cursed, and broken world, His design is good.
Right.
And we need to obey God rather than our own thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
This one is really
It is
cool.
really cool.
This comes from New Scientist. We thought the Incas couldn't write. These knots change everything. So the Incas, huge civilization. I think they said here it spanned about 5,000 kilometers, which makes sense to me, but maybe not to Americans
What's
in the
that,
audience. From modern day Ecuador to Chile. And they talk about all the amazing things that this civilization was able to do. And then they're like, but it's always sort of mystified people why they couldn't write. But now they're thinking, oh, actually, maybe they could write, but it isn't a written language that we would recognize as a written language because it's completely different. It actually could be a tactile writing system made out of ropes rather than like letters.
Well, we only have about 4 more minutes, so let's not string this out. But oh, sorry, but
We knew a pun was
actually,
coming.
I was waiting for that.
I was in Peru a number of years ago, and I remember chatting with a bunch of people about this because it was actually, they were discussing this a number of years ago. So it's interesting that it's hitting the news now, but this is called quipu, is what it is. And it's where they take this rope and basically where they put the knots and the colors and the different things
Even
coming
what
off
kind
of
of
it.
material they make the string out of seems
Right.
to help indicate what the word, what
Right, what it really
knots
means.
mean.
Now
Crazy.
they've actually known for quite some time that a lot of this actually had to do with numbers.
Numbers.
Think of like an
Like an
abacus. and that
abacus,
sort of
like,
thing.
yeah, for
but,
recording
But now they're
numbers.
starting to figure out, hey, this might have a little bit more to do than that, based on taxes and
And even what
census
type
and a lot
of fiber
different
they're
things.
using, like which type of
Yes.
animal fiber they're using. So that's why we say it's tactile. In other words, you couldn't get it just from
crazy.
looking at it. You would actually have to feel it to be able to distinguish what type of animal it was
Mm-hmm.
to, again, tell the story, whatever they're
It's
trying
amazing.
to
That's right. You
tell.
see the picture up there. It just looks like, well, a bunch of cords and stranded together. Well, what does that mean? I'd see things like that at a number of places down in Peru. And believe it or not, that right there, if they can decipher it properly, we might be
Tell
able
them
to
a
learn a lot more
ton
about
the
it.
Incas. Yeah, and they're hoping they've kind of, they were saying in this article, they may have discovered sort of the Rosetta Stone, so to speak, for this language, and they may be able to decipher some of it using Spanish records from the time to sort of collaborate it and figure out what it's trying to say, which is really
Yeah.
cool.
It's been a hard
Yeah.
knot to crack. Oh, man, I'm telling you, they just
That
So
was
they don't
really
know
bad.
if it's like some sort of, they don't know if the knots represent syllables, like possible syllables that would have been spoken, if like a phonetic type of thing, or exactly what it
each one
is, or
represents
if it
its
has
own
to do
word.
with a system of symbols, what, we don't have a Rosetta Stone, right? Like we do
Right.
for the Egyptian hieroglyphics. So it might be some time and it might be more guesses than actual, what it really meant. But it is interesting. We think a lot of times, and granted, this is from the 1500s, but we think, ancient man was dumb and couldn't do things. But yeah, and these people, they knew they were extraordinary, and they had an extraordinary language system apparently
yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Like nothing
so
we
cool.
have
Right.
today.
Yeah, these
This
are
is-
people
this
that
is like-
left Babel
Yeah,
and
this is like
went across the
three-dimensional
ocean.
writing too. 3D
Yeah,
writing.
it's like so cool.
It's just fascinating when you step back and think about it. So people are brilliant as they've traveled all around the world. And,
Yep.
I get blown away by this kind of stuff.
That's
so.
pretty cool.
All right, we got time for one more. Let's do this
This
one.
one, I picked this one because you just,
We'll end
the
on this
headline,
note.
you just, promiscuous early humans interbred multiple times in world of debauchery. So they get these promiscuous humans that live in this world of debauchery because they found that Neanderthals and what they call modern humans had children together multiple times. So the original story used to be Neanderthals and humans never had any contact, never had children together, anything.
Right.
And then it changed to, well, they had some contact, and it appears that there were some groups that
Interbred.
quote unquote interbred. And now it's, okay, they interbred a lot.
All the time, yeah. but you know, you got to think, in the secular story, you know, man was a dumb brute. You have certain people evolving out of Africa, you know, the Neanderthals are in Europe and some heading toward Asia, and then they intermix and that sort of thing. This is the secular mindset. When we think biblically, you have Noah's family after the flood. They end up at the Tower of Babel, the confusion of languages. People are going to various parts of the world, but they're interbreeding with each other.
Because they're all one race, the
because
human
they're all
race.
one
Yeah,
race,
so
the human race.
This promiscuous world of debauchery is just humans marrying and having children with other
With
humans.
other
Other humans.
Like,
Yeah.
You know,
the title is so misleading.
Yeah, you look in the Bible, you know, even in Genesis, you know, you think of Abraham. Abraham had children with Hagar, who was Egyptian. You know, so I mean, that's two people groups right there. Ishmael married in with an Egyptian. You have Esau marrying in with the Canaanites. We have examples of some of Jacob's descendants here. They actually went to a place where they said, "Here, let us take your daughters as wives, and we'll take our take our daughters as wives." People would do this all the time. There's intermixing a lot. This happens. It's not a big deal.
And
Yeah.
it's not
in a biblical
surprising
view.
that their DNA is part of our DNA today, because
No.
again, it's all humans. It's same human species, one human species, just different variations within that species. You know,
And this is all
marrying one
occurring.
another and having offspring.
Yeah.
Nothing
And
big
they
about
try
this from
and
a
make it
biblical
out like
worldview.
they aren't quite human. They use words like not only interbreeding, but they mated, they were breeding, which are not words that we typically use to refer to humans. So they're purposely trying to play up they weren't quite human, but they were fully human, made in God's image just like us.
Yep.
That's right.
All right.
All
Well,
right, I
that's
think we're
all
out.
we have time for today.
All right,
So,
well,
Well, hope
bless
you'll join us
everyone.
again on Thursday at 2 p.m.
yeah.
All right.
All right. See you then.